So we have a blank canvas. What are the types of love songs that exist? There's super romantic songs that get played at weddings. And then what's the opposite of that? Heartbreak or breakups. That seems pretty obvious too. But then the edges took us the most time and were the most interesting. Now let's go into the data and see what doesn't get covered by that. We would have examples of songs in our memory, like you're hot and you're cold, you're yes and you're no. We're like, okay, what is that? And then we would program that into ChatGPT and we would go back and forth.
Yeah, it was a process of trying to accurately convey this clear enough, because this piece covers 5,000 songs across 1958 all the way to the modern day. I think what's fascinating is that so much of the time was spent not just looking at the aggregate statistics, but a lot of it was just spent on an individual song. We'd pull up a Beyonce song like Love on Top, and we'd watch the music video and listen to the words and talk about it. It was so fun. I think there's this concept that I think Brett Victor, designers, talks about, which is up and down the ladder of abstraction. We wanted every song to be a dot and show the aggregate cluster of dots, but we also wanted to pull out individual songs and help you think in a more grounded, visceral way.
So hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Secrets of the Viz. Today I have the honor of inviting two guests on my show for the very first time. So I have David and Michelle, who actually won the Gold Award at the Information is Beautiful on Amazing Viz on love songs over the past decades. Today we're going to talk through about what goes behind this entire Viz, the inspiration and the troubles that they had to get to the final Viz. So I'll hand it over to David and Michelle to do a little intro about your journey in this industry.
Yeah, my name's David. And when I was an undergraduate about a decade ago, I saw Hans Rosling's famous TED Talk on global health statistics. And I was hooked on data viz ever since then. And my route has really been through a combination of data viz and web development. It's always been a dream to create for the pudding. So this was definitely a dream come true. Working with the pudding was amazing. But along that journey, I've made a lot of YouTube video and visual explanation. And both of those journeys, but especially the YouTube journey, I've shared a lot with Michelle, who's one of my best friends, but also just incredibly creative. And she's actually not a Viz-focused person per se, but she's an incredible visual designer, a storyteller, and I'll let her tell you a bit more about herself.
Wow, what a transition. Hi, I'm Michelle. I've had a very different background from David and was very lucky to meet him in undergrad, because in undergrad, I studied the humanities, and then I found in particular design thinking, and I really fell in love with the possibilities of that. I ended up in a career path that is sometimes called design research, design ethnography, qualitative user research. There's lots of different words for it. We call it need finding. And it involves a lot of talking to people, understanding them, understanding the framework of ideas, how to frame an argument, how to change the way you see a problem so that the solution suddenly comes into focus. So what I do in my day job and what I do for fun is trying to refine ideas and find the right way to approach it. I tend to think more qualitatively about data. So for me, data is very rarely visualized in terms of here's a bar graph or here's comparing quantities. It's often we heard these patterns, we heard these themes, this is the narrative. So it was such a dream to work with one of my closest friends, David, on this project, because he was the data viz powerhouse behind this work. And also it was his inspiration and dream to work with pudding. I'm really happy with what came out because it's a really nice blend of different methodologies and different worlds, I think.
That is a really beautiful background, and it seems like both your skills really complement one another. I'm excited and looking forward to see what you guys come up with in the future. So today we want to talk a little bit about the Viz that you guys did on Is the Love Song Dying? Give us a little bit of context on how the idea came about.
So where this piece originally started was, what is the most cliche pop song ever written? Because we all have these moments when we turn on the radio or Spotify, we're listening to pop music and we're like, wow, I feel like I've heard that exact line before, this exact way of talking about love and being in love. It's so cliche, it's so unoriginal. So the way that I explored this question originally was I visualized about 120,000 pop lyrics across the ages, and I was looking for common clusters of topics. And this is a kind of a map of the pop music themes. So you can see like down here, people talk a lot about bodies, like shake your body, I want to touch you, let's move, movement, all things related to that. There's things about stopping, stop, wait a minute. When they put some sugar, whatever that line, or I love you, you love me, I can't live without you. You can see a lot of the pop cliches that we hear in music kind of being clustered and visualized in this thing. I originally pitched this piece of the pudding, and they were like, this is a cool piece. We don't think it fits quite well for a pudding piece. So this is after they worked with me a bit, they reviewed it, and they said, we think this is an interesting direction. It's not quite a piece just yet. So let's maybe iterate on it, which was very gracious of them to work with me. So this question eventually turned into, how do pop musicians present themselves and perform different characters in their music? We looked at different themes, like, is there like a Nicki Minaj, Cardi B kind of archetype in pop? From there, we got interested in the question of people are presenting themselves as pop stars, and the way that Taylor Swift relates to love seems different than Cardi B or different from Ed Sheeran. We wanted to understand, how is love discussed? And then we kind of stumbled on the question of, well, there is this sense that love songs used to be more lovey-dovey and prevalent in the 60s, and now it's more about, I don't know, superficiality and sex and attractiveness on the surface. And has that change actually happened? Can we see it in the data? And that's where we eventually pivoted to the start of this piece. Michelle had sort of fully joined at that point, and we were kind of iterating through there to get to the end result. I don't know if you want to jump in or add anything about our process, Michelle.
This is great. I feel like there's a really interesting conversation going on between how quantitative normally works, which is you have to start with a robust data set. So David started this whole project with, I found this crazy data set of the Billboard top 10 hits from these decades. So you start with the data, but then it's like, well, we can tell so many stories from this, right? Like you could be like, are more pop stars women now? You can be like, are there different themes? So there's so many ways we can tell a story. And we moved into what I would describe as a much more qualitative type process, which sounds fancy, but David and I just had a ton of really interesting conversations about this data. We looked at it together. We were like, okay, this is fun. A lot of people talk about bodies, but at this point we've got endearments, non-word slang, reasoning through relationships, emotions. David had mapped out these really huge zones in the data, but you're always thinking when it comes to a final piece like this is, what is a compelling human story? Because there's so many things you can say about this data that are true, but it doesn't make it a great piece necessarily. We went through an evolution of looking at the data. Then I think one of the biggest revelations was there is a historical pattern, which is when we look at people like Nicki Minaj, Cardi B, that kind of artist. And I think this is also like us being feminists and thinking about how women have been perceived throughout time in pop culture.
Definitely.
It's like that bad bitch stereotype happened at a certain time in history, right? You're not seeing bad bitches in the 1950s, not in the same way. You might have a femme fatale or whatever, but it's a very different kind of character. And it's also about race. It's about the contribution of Black culture to American pop. It's about feminism. So we were like, this is interesting. And that led to us saying, whoa, stuff has changed over time. Love songs might have changed over time because the bad bitch is singing a different kind of love song than other pop stars throughout history. That's when we were like, wait, have love songs changed? And we got geeked up on this idea because David and I didn't know. And we hoped that we would find the answer that love was just as important, because we were tired of hearing people around us or the YouTube comments being like, your generation only cares about money and guns and sex. Surely that's not true. I'm a part of this generation. I know I care about love. I hope that our pop music speaks to that. I think we were genuinely open to find maybe Boomer Bob was right, but we had to do the work.
Was Boomer Bob based off an actual person that you guys knew, or you just made that up?
Well, didn't necessarily talk to this person, but it was based off of the author of a particular piece that I think was released, 2012, 2013, 2014, about, shout out Andrew, in The Guardian, called Love Songs Are in Decline, but at least Pharrell's Happy, that I felt like really captured the tone and the vibe of Boomer Bob. And so throughout our piece, not in the final piece, but in our like local piece, we used his image to represent Boomer Bob.
Oh no, I didn't even know that, David. I was like, this is a fun image. I didn't realize that was the exact author.
Andrew's wonderful music critic. It was more just that I thought that article summed it all up.
I will say, going back to qual versus quant, one interesting thing that makes the partnership important is that often qual can approach things from a very intuitive thematic point of view. So when we first started talking about this, I didn't know Andrew P. Street. Sorry, Mr. Street. When we first started talking about this, the conversations were about those YouTube comments. For me, when I first encountered someone I would call a boomer Bob, it was like I'd be listening to some older music, like the Shirelles or something lovely, and I'd be enjoying it. And I'd scroll through the comments, and you would see comments like this: class, great singing, respect for the audience and for themselves. That's interesting. That's like, okay. What are you talking about, right? You're implying that this generation of singers don't respect themselves. This is what the new generation is missing out. One of my favorites that we see a lot: beautiful piece, no twerking, no cussing, just pure innocence and talent. And every time I saw one of these comments, it really rubbed me the wrong way, because not only do I love music like this, as many people who love music in general, I also love rap. I love me a good WAP. There's immense talent in that kind of musicianship, and it often gets dismissed through these sort of morality arguments. Are these people boomers? We don't really know. Is their name Bob? Probably not, but
their names are Karen and Ted. So like statistically, these are like boomer generation.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it started with this general vibe. And I think what's really powerful about the difference in approach between David and I would be like, well, there's these kinds of comments out there. And David is like, okay, let's find an actual source. Let's find an actual citation. Let's point to something concrete, because people find that compelling. And it's an important dimension of building an argument.
Just taking a step back, how long did that process take you guys?
I want to say like 6 months. Is that too long?
Yeah, I think about.
It's not like 6 months of being locked up in a room or paying for studio time, got to produce. It was like we would meet every week or every other week, and we'd come back to these questions and build on them over time.
I mean, that's totally fair. When it comes to like collaboration, it usually takes a bit of time because everyone has different schedules and you have to meet up at certain times and all. So speaking on the data side, I know you guys had a lot of trouble just trying to nail down the classifications of the genres. Can you walk us through the process and the steps that you guys took to get to that?
Yeah, I can give a high-level technical summary, and then Michelle, maybe we can jump into the more of the actual process itself. We came up with some basic guesses as to what we think the different love song categories were. Then we hand-labeled a bunch from our data set, and we actually used a language model, in this case GPT-4, to go through and, given a prompt, actually label the full 5,000 data set going all the way back to 1958. And then we would look at the results, review them, and visualize them, and it wouldn't quite work. And miss some key examples. And we'd refine our prompt. We'd change our classification system. We'd think more deeply about it. And we just repeated that. I did all that work in a Jupyter notebook, and we would just continuously iterate on the classifications. So that's a high level. But Michelle, do you want to add anything about what we actually did nitty gritty? And I can share some visuals. Yeah.
So we have a blank canvas. What are the types of love songs that exist? It's like, well, they're super romantic, the kind of songs that get played at weddings. Boomer Bob definitely loves that. You're my one person, I love you so much. We didn't have the word for that, but we knew, okay, that's a certain kind of song. And then the really fundamental stuff started to fall out, like, well, what's the opposite of that? Heartbreak or breakups. I love you, but you won't be with me. I'm so sad. Boo-hoo. That seems pretty obvious too. But then the edges took us the most time and were the most interesting. And that involved, okay, we have our map of the data, but now let's go into the data and see what doesn't get covered by that. We would have examples of songs in our memory, like you're hot and you're cold, you're yes and you're no. We're like, okay, what is that? And then we would program that into ChatGPT and see how many of those songs are falling out. And we would go back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally true. It was such a process of whittling our intuition, looking at the data, trying to say, how can we accurately convey this clear enough for a model to be able to take on? And it was interesting because this piece covers 5,000 songs across 1958 all the way to the modern day. Each song is a nuanced thing to analyze, but I think what's fascinating is that so much of the time was spent not just looking at the aggregate statistics, although you can see that we did that. We looked at men versus women split out. We looked at the aggregate, all this sort of stuff, but a lot of it was just spent on an individual song. We'd pull up a Beyonce song like Love on Top, and we'd be like, watch the music video and listen to the words and talk about it. It was so fun. I think there's this concept that I think Brett Victor, designers, talks about, which is up and down the ladder of abstraction. As you get to more abstract things like how have love song types changed over time in aggregate per type across men versus women, it's really important that you go down that ladder of abstraction to the actual song itself, which is a Beyonce song, Love on Top, the vibe, the feel, the words. the performer themselves. Michelle really helped us navigate up and down that ladder of abstraction. And that was a key design principle that we brought both to our research process, but also to the piece itself. We wanted every song to be a dot and show the aggregate cluster of dots, but we also wanted to pull out individual songs and help you think in a more grounded, visceral way.
There's so much academic literature these days about the dangers of bad abstractions. A data viz is a kind of map. We're not going to listen to every single song. We have an abstract representation of something in aggregate that you can take in all at once. We do not want bad maps, and it's so easy to make a bad map. So when you're in the process of making a map, the more time you spend going back and forth between the map layer and the territory layer, the better your map becomes, which is why we didn't see it as a waste of time to sometimes spend the entire meeting watching music videos. Like, it sounds like, oh, we were just having fun, which we were.
Yes.
But it's also like, we want the reader of this final piece to be able to feel like the map we had deeply grounded in the love songs they'd actually heard and loved in their lives. This piece would be a failure if they saw these categories and they were like, I don't know what you're talking about. What is this random category of good? I don't know. That doesn't resonate with my experience. We wanted people to see this abstract map and go, wow, that immediately helps me understand my own experience of music better, because fundamentally that's what proves the piece. I will add maybe one thing, which is that our process was very iterative and it was very back and forth.
Yeah.
I meant to say this earlier. I feel like since the rise of big data in our society, we've had this false cultural belief that if we just have more data, the answers will fall out.
Yes.
And as a qualitative researcher, I know this is deeply not true, and that there's a qualitative element to all forms of data viz, right? Even the quant ones, because you have to decide what question to ask and the definitions of what falls into what category. And we spent 6 months even finding the love songs dying question. And I really believe in this part of the process taking a long time, actually. For a lot of data vizes, don't spend enough time asking what is the compelling question. And they start to get into, oh, the real work is generating the charts and figuring out how things fall out and then visualizing it. But I think David and I agree that so much of this is figuring out what is the right question. And then once you have the right question, it's okay to actually invest in it. And I think when the rubber meets the road, it can feel very uncomfortable to be like, we have spent 2/3 of our time debating the actual question. Is this okay? Are we behind schedule? And it's like, actually, no. If you really believe this, then you recognize that you have to face that discomfort and say, we're right on schedule. Because if we get this part right, the rest will be so much more compelling. So I'm really glad that we very much took our time. I want to praise David's enormous diligence and patience and hard work, because he had to go back so many times and rewrite the code and have things sort out differently. We were very uncompromising here. What we did, so to speak of the actual process, is it was a conversation between human intuition and the data that was mediated by technology.
This is wonderful because I think the names that you guys picked out really bring out the raw emotions for each of the categories. And I think you did that really well, because even before you introduced like the different categories as you were exploring the fizz, I knew exactly what you guys were talking about before you guys explained it. So I think you did really, really well in terms of naming those. You should be really proud of yourself.
Yay, that's what we love to hear. That's really what we wanted. We wanted basically the text at the top to be almost irrelevant. That was a big learning for me, because a lot of qualitative reports are very text and language heavy. And also you as the researcher will stand there presenting it. This was, no, the graph has to be the centerpiece. That was so challenging for me personally. I learned a lot from the pudding, from Matt Daniels, who was an amazing mentor on this project for us. And this was huge for me in terms of learning, because I wanted to go on for paragraphs and paragraphs about, and what is the origin of this category? We did not put that much effort into it, because at that point, it was like the graph speaks for itself, which is kind of awesome. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. Everyone listening to this podcast knows that. This is the revelation of an outsider, like, whoa, data viz works. You don't need language. But that was really my journey on this process.
Yeah, I think that's really something that is recurring in the data viz world, because often in times we are taught to label everything, like everything has to be clearly labeled and pointed out for the users. But with proper kind of visual hierarchy put in place, you can actually have the lack of text per se, and let the chart breathe by itself if the data is able to speak for themselves. I think that makes a more compelling storytelling. I had a question about the colors, because choosing colors for data viz is like the most painful process, because there's so many considerations in terms of accessibility, in terms of the emotions that colors might bring, and there's a whole spectrum of conversations around that.
I think one of the first visual inspirations we had was actually cereal boxes from the 90s.
Yes.
We thought this was so iconic. And so our conceptual Pinterest board was jelly beans spilled on top of 90s newsprint. We wanted to be colorful, but in a kind of CMYK way. One of the guiding principles for us was if we printed this on a piece of paper, it would still look vibrant. So it wouldn't be the kind of fluorescent RGB you're looking at a screen, because we're dealing with a historical period in which there weren't always screens. Ted Gioia's History of the Love Song was a really important reference for us both. We were reading this book as we were preparing this because we were like, okay, there's an academic world of understanding the history of love songs. And that also grounded the visual color choices. Like Ted Gioia's book goes into how incredibly ancient love songs are, way past the 1950s. You know, like we don't have the data for that. There was no billboard. But love songs are one of the most ancient forms of communication, let alone of music. And whatever it is, it has to be vibrant, but it can't look too digital. So I think that's how we picked these colors. We were like, it's got to be on this warm, printed, this beigey background.
Yeah, it was so fun to make it together.
And I think also the passion that you guys have towards the topic itself kind of binds you guys together in this project. That's really beautiful. Is there any other projects that you want to tease the audience that you guys might want to work on next?
So one of my new obsessions is the history of energy and how it's shaped the world that we've gotten to today. I'm starting this new series. It's part of a broader like performative videos that I'm calling data comedy, or like live data narration, where I narrate time series data over time. And the one that will be coming out next is the history of US versus Russian/Soviet oil production over time, and it's intermingling with war and with politics and like reshaping of the world. So if you like history and sort of wild, quirky data viz, much in the style of Hans Rosling narrating the history of global health and population, then you might like this. And I have another piece that's sort of related to that, which is looking at what people want in a romantic partner, men versus women over time. That'll be coming out on my YouTube channel as well.
For my personal life, I'm trying to start a design school in Toronto. So if you're listening and you live in Toronto, hit me up, email me. I'm really obsessed right now with the central thesis that when we think about creativity, we often tend to focus on the idea of production, the people who produce creative things, Steve Jobs, the greats. And I think not enough attention has been paid to reception and to listening, and the way that great conversations actually produce really amazing work. So the focus of the design school is on creating really great listeners. And I mean that in a holistic sense. Listening to the world, which is what you need to do to make a great data viz. It's my great thesis that if we can elevate our ability of listening, the things that we make will naturally become better.
I'm sure there's going to be more to come in the coming years. So I look forward to see what you guys are up to next.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was so fun to get to share with you, and thank you.
Yeah, appreciate both your time, and I hope everyone learned something from this, and we'll see everyone at the next episode. Thank you.